Take some jazz, add performing, composing, arranging, and recording. And you have my guest, David Garfield. He's performing with the David Garfield Quintet at Maxan Jazz this Friday and Saturday, December 13th and 14th. And for ticket information, go to maxanjazz.com. For everything about David, go to davidgarfield.com, and you can follow him on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. And David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ira. It's good to be here.
Pleasure. What got you started in the world of music and then specifically jazz and similar genres of music?
Well, that's a great question. My family loved music. We had a Steinway grand piano in the house and a hi-fi system. Back when I was a kid, they invented stereo when I was very little. Went from one speaker to two speakers.
I love it when I love it when you said the word hi-fi. I haven't heard hi-fi in about 40 years, so I love it when you
It was like furniture. It was like a piece of furniture. And, my mom would polish it, and it had
right.
grilling on the front, a little red light. But we would sit on the floor of the living room and listen to records and look at the covers, and it was a world like some people grew up like that with books. Like my dad was into books like that. For me, it was record albums. Who are these people? Who is Upper? Who are the Beatles?
Right. What made you decide though, once you decided to become a musician, I'd like to hear a little bit about that, but then also how you picked the genre you wanted to focus on.
It's quite an interesting story. So music was all around our house, and my oldest sister was a good pianist, and I was playing piano, and then I took up drums for the orchestra. In the school orchestra, they don't have piano, and I was playing the drums, and I had good rhythm, and then I got interested in rock and roll, and all this stuff was kind of coming along as we were growing up, and I got say bitten by the rock and roll bug. I wanted to have a drum set. I wanted to be like Ringo Starr and everything. And so I just loved music. It was like a hobby. It was a big interest of mine, and I never thought I would be a career in it. I just was, but I loved it. And it's
Mhm.
like it was a passion. So the school band, took music lessons, and as I got into high school a turning event happened when the high school jazz band performed Spinning Wheel by Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Mhm.
And there's this great trumpet solo in it. And this friend of mine from school played the trumpet solo, and it just knocked me out. And that was the beginning of jazz for me. Up until then, I really wasn't familiar with jazz. It was foreign music. My parents listened to classical, folk music, opera, different things. But once I heard that trumpet solo on Spinning Wheel and the band kicking, it I joined the stage band next year, and I got rid of all my rock and roll records and went out and bought Coltrane and Miles. And then, of course, I didn't understand it. So that was another thing. I had a little learning curve.
Sure.
But that's how it happened. It was in my sophomore year of high school.
And let's not forget Dave Brubeck. That would be a nice one to listen to too.
One of the original songs we started jamming on was Take Five. You see, it was a transition from the rock world to the jazz world. There was a group called Quicksilver Messenger Service with a pianist named Nicky Hopkins, and they had a song called Gold and Silver, and it was like doo ding doo ding doo 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 doo. It was freaking Take Five. I mean, but we just kind of worked our way into the jazz world from rock, because rock, when I went later in life, I went to a panel event at the House of Blues, and I went with Horace Silver, the pianist. Everybody on the stage started saying he's the guy we were influenced by. Everybody really listened to jazz. Jazz was the improvising music, and rock is a lot like that. In the early days, a lot of extended. I don't know if you knew this. The group The Birds,
Mhm.
did a lot of Dylan songs. They did this song called 8 Miles High, and the guitar player was trying to play Coltrane solo from My Favorite Things on the
I
guitar.
did not know that. I learn something new every day.
I can't even recognize it, to be honest with you.
It's
He didn't
amazing.
quite cop it, but it's in E minor, and
Right.
the thing is that My Favorite Things by Coltrane became one of my all-time favorite songs. And
There is something unique about jazz. I've always felt that the jazz world is not as appreciated in a major sense, and then there's a majority of the population, but it sustains itself generation after generation. with your experience, career, and insight, what is the reason why jazz continues? Maybe it doesn't prosper as much as rock does or other genres, but it endures. And why do you think that is?
Well, because there's something special in jazz music where with the improvisation it's just kind of a magic that happens that's it's timeless. It's not tied to any one generation, you know. And I think younger generations come up and they get exposed to it, and then they find that attraction there. It's not limited to a certain era of time. Like I think I just came from Nashville where I did a show, and I was talking with someone, and he was telling me his son, you know, like his son is just obsessed with listening to jazz and really enjoyed my show because we did jazz. You know, I honestly think it's because of the magic of improvisation because it's always different.
I could see that if you think about the rock side of things, different generations listen to different kinds of rock music with some
Sure.
crossover. But as you say, with jazz, it being timeless, I can refer to Dave Brubeck, who's long gone, and yet everybody knows Take Five, everybody knows about Dave Brubeck. It just continues no matter what age you are or what generation you come from.
Miles Davis Kind of Blue is still selling probably in the top 3% sales of all jazz albums. And that was from the 50s. I mean, I'm partial to jazz. Um, but I mean, honestly, there is a timeless element of it, especially if you're playing it from the heart, because it reflects whatever's going on at that time. You know, it's not tied like at one time they might have used clarinets. You can play jazz now with a synthesizer. You know, I mean, it's not limited to one time period. It's just I would say it like this. You know, there's classical music, which is also fairly timeless. You know, it's lived on for years. Classical music is spelled out exactly how it's supposed to be performed. Every little articulation, every little dynamic, everything. It's completely laid out. Play this and it's going to sound great. Play it like this. Jazz, on the other hand, is like a shape, a kind of an outline. We're going to play in this key and we're going to play this melody at this tempo. And then we're just going to kind of let it go where it goes. And those are the two kinds of musics for me, though, written
Yeah.
or improvised.
One last question, I want to ask you a little bit about your quintet, and that is with jazz. As you mentioned, it's the improvisation, and yet there are so many connections between jazz and what I refer to as the Great American Songbook that also endure over decades and generations as well. And a lot of the material from the Great American Songbook, I don't think was necessarily written with the idea of it being jazz. It was just part of the musical show.
Exactly. And you bring up a great point. There was a period of time when there was issues with publishing rights, and they actually needed people to play songs based on the Great American songs, but without playing the melody. So I don't know if you're familiar with these. Technically, there was a song called Donna Lee that Charlie Parker wrote, which was actually Back Home Indiana. And or no, Donna Lee was Sweet Georgia Brown. You know, there was a lot of songs that were written off of the chord changes of popular Great American music songs, but they changed them because they had some very strict publishing rules, and that was part of the evolution of jazz. Was that particular thing? It's quite interesting. I have to go back and look it up to see exactly what happened, but there's a whole period where you have lots of songs written based on the changes of a Great American Songbook song, and it got a different name. Like How High the Moon, then they did one called Ornithology, which is How High the Moon, and there's one called well, you get the point.
Sure, but there was also that affiliation with between jazz. You think of people like Ella Fitzgerald and others who sang a lot of the songs from musicals that were part of the Great American Songbook genre, and yet they had a jazz tempo to them. The words may be the same, and the general melody was the same, but it still had a different tempo to it.
Well, exactly. And so jazz literally was jazzing something up. Like you might say, here's have yourself a merry little Christmas, and you might have it done very straight, like Judy Garland, whatever. And then you could get some guy come in and go, And so it's just for me, it's about improvising, it's about fusing, it's about molding. That's why I use all elements. Like I on my records, like I don't know if you checked out Jazz Outside the Box, I do a Duke Ellington song
Mhm.
and I do a Stevie Wonder song. I mean, it's like they're all songs, and then I like to put my little spin on them. I do my own arrangement, but then I have a lot of room for improvising. So in my shows, there's a lot of improvising. And actually, I just came from this show in Nashville. We had to cut down so that we could get more songs in because sometimes we'll go on for a long time with the improvising. So I said, well, I only have one night. I want to get some of these songs in there. So it was quite successful. And, you know, I would also say that when you're talking about this, George Gershwin, what do you think? This is very interesting. Do you think of George Gershwin as successful?
Oh, yes,
Did
absolutely.
you know that in his time he was considered a flop?
I did not know that, but I do know the reason I think of George Gershwin a lot is because his brother's name is Ira.
There you go.
So what I have to.
Yeah.
But I thought they were
Well,
both, though, both, I thought they were both successful in their time.
very interesting. There's a guy named Hershey Felder, wonderful pianist and actor who goes around the country playing small theaters. He does these shows where he becomes the person. So he did a Chopin show, he did a Debussy show, he did a Gershwin show. And so he actually learned so much about Gershwin. So Irving Berlin was incredibly successful with the songs he was writing, and he was just raking them in, hitting the eye on bullseyes with every song. Gershwin was the underdog, and he would send his stuff in. They go, "Why can't you write something like Irving Berlin?" Oh, they dogged him, and when he opened the Porgy and Bess, it was a disaster. Now, I really don't, I may have heard that, but I've forgotten that Summertime is like the most sung song of all time. And that Porgy and Bess opens with Summertime, which I find quite interesting. 'Cause I only saw Porgy and Bess, maybe 10 years ago for the first time. I played Summertime all my life. There it is. Gershwin he liked jazz. He was coming from some Eastern European stuff, and he really wanted to write jazz and stuff, and they just hated it. And they hated him, and he was considered a flop.
Interesting.
That's hard to believe when you think about Rhapsody in Blue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All those songs that he composed and Ira wrote the lyrics to, and they live on, even if at the time, as you say, in their own time, they were not considered successful, but they clearly were, you know.
And he was there. I always telling him, why can't you write something like Irving Berlin? Irving Berlin wrote, didn't he write White Christmas?
Yes.
He did. You know, he and he wasn't even Christian. I mean, he was going for the money. He said, "I'm going to write this song. I'm going to write that song." He was very clever. He wrote a lot of hits. They also did a show on Irving Berlin, which I found fascinating. But Gershwin, oh my gosh, they considered him like a failure. And that's what. And then his music is so great, and it lives on. And like you say, it became called the Great American Songbook. But remember this: Vincent Van Gogh, probably one of the greatest artists of all time. What do you think one of his paintings is worth?
Oh, millions, of course, sometimes even 50 to 60 to 70 million, maybe more.
He died feeling a failure.
Minus
And
one ear, too.
yeah, and I think it was suicide. And he had very little money, felt like a complete failure. So this is what keeps me laughing and smiling with my music because I'm going for Van Gogh and Gershwin status because if I don't get on the top number one with my next release, which comes out in January, I've got a song coming out in January with Herb Alpert on trumpet. It's a great song. If they don't play it and it doesn't, get all the accolades, I'm gonna think about Van Gogh and Gershwin.
Exactly. And you should, rightly so. I mean, those are good people to model after.
Yeah, because I'm trying to write the best music I can. I'm not
Exactly.
trying to write just to get on the radio. I'm trying to make my art course, I want people to enjoy it. Like, you want to cook a dinner and have no one wants to eat it,
No,
so
no.
you got to make something that's tasty.
On the other hand, if no one wants to eat it but you enjoy it, then you've satisfied yourself.
Exactly. So,
Look at it that way too.
but you'll be surprised, Ira. I do songs like Beatles songs, and I've done Eric Clapton, and I do them in my jazz style.
Sure. When you come to Maxan Jazz, and again, that's this Friday and Saturday, December 13th and 14th, you've got the quintet with you. So that implies there's more than one of you. See, I figured that one out by the word quintet.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
If you want to give a
Like,
shout out to the guys in the band, you're more than welcome to.
of course, well, see, now my good friend David Inamine is a wonderful bass player. He's originally from Hilo, Hawaii. He's been in Vegas for a long time. He's been trying to get me to come up there for forever. We do a lot of work around the world, but but we've never played Vegas. And since he lives there, he introduced me to Max and the club, and they were nice enough to invite us to do the weekend. So Dave will be on bass. On drums is a young drummer from Las Vegas who's one of the hot young guys, and I have not met him yet. I'm going to give you his name because I want to shout out to him, Cam Tyler. And he's one of the hot young drummers in Vegas, so he's looking forward to playing with me because my music, I have a reputation. I've played with the last greatest dozen drummers, on my records and in my band. So he's
Yeah, I want people to check out your website because not only have you worked with so many major artists, including Smokey Robinson is clearly one of the top ones, but also you mentioned it and you alluded to it earlier about some of the unique projects of your own as
Oh
well.
yeah. Well, you
And
mentioned Smokey Robinson. Smokey has a house in Vegas, and I'm going to be letting him know. I don't know if he's there now, but the last time I played in LA, Smokey was in Vegas. So now I'm playing Vegas. And my next call after we get off the interview, I want to make sure if he's in town, he'll come out. Steve Gadd lives up in Vegas. I shouldn't be saying some of these people want to keep their privacy, but I'm going to
right.
be inviting him out to the show. Um, so Cam Tyler on drums. Carmen Grillo is a wonderful guitarist and vocalist I've worked with in LA for decades. He was with Tower of Power. He was with the Sons of Champlin, and he's currently with Frankie Valli. He's moved up to Vegas, so I'll be having him on the gig as well. So that's three, and then the last one is my dear friend Lamont Dozier Jr., son
Nice.
of Lamont
Yeah,
Dozier.
I know
So
exactly what you were. Yeah, sure.
he's up in Vegas. He's going to be our vocalist. So it'll be drums, bass, guitar, keys, and vocals. Do some instrumentals and some vocals, and
Nice. I'm spreading a rumor that David Garfield is moving to Vegas, so we'll see what happens with that.
well, you can do that. I was just in Nashville, and everybody's going, "Are you moving here?" I had great time down there. I've been in Los Angeles 50 years, and it's just been wonderful. But it's really refreshing to go to some other places and see that it's very strong these days. That like there's a lot of great stuff going on in all these other cities. So, have you been to Maxon before?
Yes, I have been there. I've been there a couple of times. I enjoy the club, so I'm going to try and come out and see you when you're there. The other part of Vegas is it's changed so much over the last 20, 30 years. People used to think of it as one way gambling and that's it. But there's a major musical aspect to Las Vegas, separate from the Strip and downtown. So you have a lot of these clubs like Maxim Jazz that are throughout the valley that allow artists to perform, not allow artists, but have artists perform. So you'll be surprised when you come up, take a look around, maybe have one of your friends drive you around. You can see how the city has grown over the last 20, 30 years. It's pretty impressive.
I played up in Las Vegas when I was with Freddie Hubbard, and this is in 1976, 1977, something like that. And it is Monk Montgomery. Did you ever know Monk?
Yes, he formed the jazz club, I believe, up here in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas Jazz Society and stuff.
Right,
We
correct.
all stayed at his house, and there was a little, like, kind of a mini jazz weekend, that the society put together. We played, I believe we played at a club in Vegas. And I can't remember the name of the club, but we played at a
Well,
club
I'm
in
glad you corrected me. I called it the Jazz Club, but it was the Jazz Society, and so that's the correct term for it. Yeah, and yeah, he was a force for jazz at a certain point in time here in Las Vegas.
Oh
So,
yeah. And of course Wes Montgomery's brother,
right.
so and the first electric bass player in jazz. But Monk, I don't remember the club, but I believe we played a club. It could have been called the Town Club.
Could
And
be. I'm
coming
just
out of
trying to think at
my
going
memory
back in
bank.
time. Yeah, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, and you put me on the spot, which I'm happy to be on, and I'll get to it. Maybe by the end of our conversation, I will think of the name of the club that you were at.
It might have been called the Town Club, and then it was like off. It was like in a different neighborhood, and then they had another event somewhere. Had so check this out. I wake up in the morning. I walk into the kitchen of the house, to look and see if I get some coffee or water. And there's a woman over the stove with her hair all wrapped up cooking, and it's Sarah Vaughan. And I look over at the table, at the breakfast table, and it's Dave Grusin and Ron Carter. I'm like, I better go back and put my clothes on. I was in my car. Yeah, it was a wonderful weekend.
Sounds like you could call it the House of Jazz.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That would be great. Well, with your experience in your career and all of the things you've done, do you see things differently now than you did 30 years ago in terms of, again, maybe more jazz than any other kind of music, but are you looking at jazz differently now than you did 30 years ago?
Yes and no. I'm not playing different or thinking about music differently, but I see how everything kind of falls together. And there's some major, major chunks of that. Like one of them is we all dream of having our gigs and tours and being the artist, and the star. All musicians dream of that. But I think I've got to taste what it's like a little bit to be that, and it's not what you think it is. It's like you got to eat a ton of crap for a long time before you get up to that level where you get in the gravy, if you know what I mean. There's a lot that falls on you. So like that's been a real awakening. Like I've been leading my own bands and tours for quite a long time. I've been to every corner of the world, and it's it's rewarding, but you got to work. You got to do the
Sure.
work.
What is
And
it about jazz musicians that it's different than, for example, rock musicians? And here's to my point, David. Maybe you can explain it. I've talked to a lot of rock musicians, and there are always exceptions, of course, but I've talked to a lot of jazz musicians. And jazz musicians generally, as opposed to rock musicians, have their feet on the ground as much as they can at being musicians, because when you're a musician, you're definitely a nonlinear type of personality in most cases. But you're very much, when I say you, the plural, you're very much down to earth in a way that you don't see in other, as I mentioned, rock musicians. Rock musicians, if they, especially if they're at a certain level, you, they're in another totally different world. They're not going to connect with you at all. Why is that? Is it the music or is it the lifestyle or what is it?
it's quite interesting that you bring up a very good point. I have to elaborate on this. I was mostly in the jazz world, and then you get a lot of this, hey man, yeah, beautiful, man. Oh, that's out of sight, man. Oh man, solid. It was a whole beautiful vibe. And then some rock guys really love jazz and they picked that up. But then when I got in, I had a band for a long time with the guitarist from Toto, Steve Lukather. We had a band together, and he was more going into the rock world. And so we'd have these encounters with people from that world. And what I noticed, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but what I noticed was that a lot of the rock people tended to be rather edgy and kind of rude. It wasn't that warmth, like, hey, man, oh, it's great to see you. Be like, hey, man, is that your shit over there? You know, that amplifier isn't any good. I need to be, they had a very edgy thing that I didn't like. I said, no, this is why I gravitated to jazz,
Yeah,
because the jazz
your
gets, huh?
no, I was going to say your affinity obviously is to jazz based on what you were just saying. Huh?
Well, it's the warmth. There's a warmth there. Now, it's not limited. Like I said, I've known a lot of rock guys. I got to know Ed Van Halen. He was a sweetheart. There was a period where he called me up, the phone would ring. David, it's Eddie Van Halen. I'm great. And I helped him out. His dad was a jazz musician, and he actually played piano and stuff. But it's like, I think some of those guys got spoiled with a lot of popularity because I've watched it all happen. I've watched it for I just celebrated 50 years in LA doing music.
Congratulations, that's great.
All I've ever done is music. And I've watched a lot of guys come up, bands form, bands get success, bands break up. And by the way, bands, it's that's a whole nother topic. Bands, when we were kids, we thought these utopian things where guys are all brothers and it's all democracy. And it's a I think it's kind of a myth, and that's why the Beatles didn't last that long. Remember the Beatles broke up? We were like, why are the Beatles breaking up? But when you get to know what was going on inside the Beatles, they could sustain that.
Right. Yeah, but they did when they did sustain it, it was at a high level. So it was pretty impressive.
But they didn't know they were going to get to be that popular. And then
Right.
they got so popular and they weren't trying to be there. Listen, John Densmore, the drummer of The Doors, is a close friend and collaborates with me. He's actually on Jazz Outside the Box. Um, he told me, he takes care of Jim Morrison's estate and everything. We had a lunch recently, and he's like, we didn't have the word rock star. We never thought of us as rock stars. We were just guys trying to do this music. So this whole concept of rock star is all after the fact. It's kind of man-made. They were anything but stars. And they followed Coltrane around LA, by the way. Um, John is a completely frustrated jazz player, and he used to follow Elvin Jones around and go to Shelley's Mantle there in LA. And he's a beautiful cat. And so we played jazz together. That's how we met. We had a group called Tribal Jazz. So, you know, honestly, if you dig deep into any of the music of the rock and roll world or the Motown world or anything, you'll find on the session players that all the guys really were jazz players at heart, and they went into the studio and did the session to help out and make the money, but they were
Sure.
bringing the jazz sensibilities.
Yeah, no, that's great. Before I let you go, we only have about a minute or so left. What's your future projects coming up? You have another out of the box situation, or what are you doing?
Well, we've done 6 outside the box CDs, and I think that's going to end that series. And then since then, I've been doing a lot of things called Salute to the Masters. I've been doing a whole slew. I did one to Miles Davis with Freddie Freeloader, with Rick Braun and Eric Manthel. I did Windows with Grant Geisman for Chick Corea, and then I did the what's it called? Uh, Ticket to Pittsburgh for George Benson, who was my long-term boss. I did a beautiful guitar jazz thing with Paul Jackson Jr. So I think I'll just keep releasing these. Every once in a while I'll do an original, and then every once in a while I'll do a song in tribute. Like you mentioned Brubeck. I should honor Dave with something. I got to meet Dave, and I had some wonderful times with him, and he shared some beautiful stories, and he was a beautiful cat and an amazing player.
That should be your next project. That'd be great.
We have to do another interview whenever you want because I got some stories about Dave Brubeck and the Charlie Brown theme because he turned it down. They wanted him to do it, the
Well,
original.
I have an idea. I'll talk about it with you after the show. So that's great.
Right.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been David Garfield. He's performing with the David Garfield Quintet at Maxan Jazz, and that's this Friday and Saturday, December 13th and 14th. For ticket information, go to maxanjazz.com. And for everything about David, go to davidgarfield.com. Follow him on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. And David, thanks for being on the show.
It's been my pleasure, absolute pleasure. And our next release will be in January, and it's going to be Rainy Day Song featuring Herb Alpert, and I'm so excited about that.
Great. See you next time.